Animation in the 1960s wasn't all colorful fun and catchy songs. Some films sparked outrage, sparked protests, or even found themselves locked away in vaults. Why? Because they dared to push buttons audiences didn't expect in a cartoon. From psychedelic dreamscapes that terrified parents to family favorites hiding darker undertones, these films caused waves. So which 60s animated movies stirred the most controversy? Buckle up, the list is about to surprise you. Number 10. The Man Called Flintstone, 1966. At first glance, The Man Called Flintstone looked like an innocent spin-off of everyone's favorite Stone Age sitcom. Fred, Wilma, Barney, and Betty were household names, thanks to the Flintstones. So, naturally, Hanna-Barbera thought a feature-length movie would be a hit. What could possibly go wrong? Try mixing Cold War spy satire with a show kids adored, and watch the backlash roll in. The movie placed Fred Flintstone in the middle of an international spy adventure. With his look-alike secret agent injured, Fred is mistaken for a James Bond-type figure and sent on missions involving shady foreign agents, car chases, and explosions. Sure, the prehistoric gags and goofy humor were there, but suddenly, Fred was dodging danger. Women were swooning over him, and the story leaned into Bond-style parody. For a Saturday morning icon, this was jarring. Parents and critics complained almost immediately. The tone was darker, the violence was more explicit, and the international espionage backdrop hit a nerve in 1966, the height of Cold War tension. This wasn't just silly slapstick anymore. It was Fred Flintstone tangled up in nuclear-age anxieties. Educators and family groups argued the film confused children by turning a familiar family sitcom into a lesson in global paranoia. Then came the humor. The film loaded itself with double entendres and winks to adults in the audience, a movie that sparked debate about whether animated films were slipping away from their role as wholesome entertainment. Some even accused Hanna-Barbera of trying to ride the James Bond wave without considering the cultural impact on young viewers. A prehistoric Bond parody was one thing, but combining it with beloved characters felt like betrayal to loyal parents. Censors stepped in for international releases, trimming scenes of explosions, gunplay, and implied danger. Yet the cuts didn't stop the chatter. Religious groups in the US voiced disapproval, saying cartoons shouldn't flirt with themes of lust, greed, and violence in the guise of comedy. Even the marketing was scrutinized, with posters making Fred look more like a suave secret agent than a bumbling caveman. The controversy didn't sink the movie entirely. It was modestly successful at the box office, but it reshaped how studios approached family-friendly spin-offs. The Man Called Flintstone proved that taking a trusted cartoon brand and forcing it into grown-up genres could backfire. It left a mark as one of the strangest, most divisive animated films of the 60s, part family fun, part Cold War fever dream. Number 9. Hey There, It's Yogi Bear, 1964. By the mid-1960s, Yogi Bear was practically royalty in Saturday morning animation. Hanna-Barbera's Smarter Than the Average Bear had charmed kids and parents alike, so a feature-length movie seemed like a no-brainer. Hey There, It's Yogi Bear promised a lighthearted adventure filled with picnic baskets, Jellystone hijinks, and cheerful songs. Instead, it sparked an unexpected wave of complaints that still shadows its reputation. The movie's story takes a sharp turn from Yogi's usual antics. Instead of sneaking sandwiches and tricking Ranger Smith, Yogi finds himself in a darker plot where his beloved companion Cindy Bear is kidnapped by a scheming circus owner. Suddenly, a cartoon about silly bears becomes a tense narrative involving animal captivity, forced performances, and near escapes. Critics at the time were quick to point out how unsettling this was for young audiences. Animal welfare groups also raised their eyebrows. The circus sequences showed animals mistreated or exploited, even if meant for comedy or drama. For kids who adored Yogi's carefree spirit, these scenes hit a lot harder than intended. Some parents accused the film of traumatizing children with imagery of cages, nets, and captivity. What was supposed to be harmless fun ended up sparking debates about how entertainment depicts cruelty to animals. The musical numbers didn't soften the blow either. Cindy Bear's emotional ballads about being trapped gave the story a surprising heaviness. Critics claimed Hanna-Barbera had miscalculated by blending grim themes with colorful cartoon antics. The balance never quite landed, and controversy flared. Some cities even saw local theater managers hesitate to book the film. unsure if it was appropriate for its intended audience. But the backlash also carved a strange legacy for the movie. While it did modest business in theaters, Hey There, It's Yogi Bear is remembered as the moment Hanna-Barbera crossed into darker storytelling, perhaps unintentionally. For many families, it marked a realization that even their favorite cartoons weren't always safe. In hindsight, the controversy feels almost ironic. Today, viewers might find the movie tame compared to modern kids' media. But in 1964, a kidnapping plot, animal cruelty undertones, and heavy emotions made this picnic less of a laugh and more of a lightning rod. Number 8. Mad Monster Party, 1967. If you thought stop motion was only about cozy Christmas specials, think again. Rankin Bass, the studio behind Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, shocked audiences when they unleashed Mad Monster Party, a psychedelic comedy packed with classic horror icons. It was supposed to be a spooky laugh fest. Instead, parents and critics called it grotesque, disturbing, and way too intense for kids. The premise sounds fun enough. Baron von Frankenstein, voiced by Boris Karloff himself, invites an army of movie monsters, Dracula, the Mummy, the Creature, and more, to a wild party on a remote island. What could go wrong? Well, everything. Between the grotesque puppet designs, bizarre storylines, and surprisingly grim humor, the film quickly earned its reputation as controversial. For one, the monster designs weren't cute or funny. They were deliberately exaggerated and often frightening. Kids who expected friendly creatures got nightmare fuel instead. The tone didn't help. Jokes about betrayal, destruction, and even end-of-the-world scenarios made some parents furious. Critics wondered why Rankin Bass would market such a twisted story to children when it clearly leans toward horror, satire. Then there was the psychedelic flair. Released in 1967, The Summer of Love, the film's visuals were loaded with trippy colors and strange imagery. To adults, this felt like a wink at counterculture. To children, it was just plain confusing. Religious groups blasted it for glorifying monsters and mocking morality. Some theaters even refused to screen it for kids' matinees, claiming it was too frightening. The irony, Mad Monster Party was way ahead of its time. Decades later, it would be praised for inspiring The Nightmare Before Christmas and cult monster mashups. But in the 1960s, it was branded a mistake. Too weird for adults, too dark for kids, and too risky for family entertainment. In short, Rankin Bass gave us Frankenstein and Clay, but left behind a controversy that haunted the stop-motion genre for years. Number 7. The Adventures of Pow Wow, 1960. In 1960, Screen Gems thought they had struck gold with a culturally educational cartoon for children. The result was The Adventures of Pow Wow, a series of shorts packaged and distributed like a feature-length experience in some markets. On the surface, it followed a young Native American boy named Pow Wow and his animal friends on lighthearted adventures in the Old West. But what audiences actually got was one of the most controversial animated releases of the decade. The problem started with how Native American life was portrayed. Pow Wow spoke in broken English, spouting lines like, "Me go find buffalo now." His tribe was a random mashup of stereotypes. Plains Indian headdresses next to Pacific Northwest totem poles, teepees in settings where Native people historically lived in houses, and a grab bag of cliches tied together without accuracy or respect. To children, it may have looked like simple cartoon fun, but to Native communities it was a slap in the face. Then came the so-called educational segments. Between episodes, the show inserted factual tidbits about Native culture, except most of them weren't factual at all. Kids were told that all Native Americans lived in teepees, worshipped a vague Great Spirit, and had no written language or mathematics. In short, it spread misinformation on a massive scale, under the guise of education. Native American leaders wasted no time calling it cultural erasure dressed up as entertainment. The backlash was swift. The National Congress of American Indians condemned the series almost immediately, labeling it harmful to Native children's identity. Protests and letter-writing campaigns targeted both Screen Gems and the local stations airing it. Veterans groups also joined the outcry, pointing out the bitter irony that Native men who had served in World War II were being dishonored back home by a racist cartoon. The controversy only grew when politicians started weighing in. By 1961, major stations in New York and Los Angeles dropped the series after demonstrations outside their studios. Yet, in some rural markets, especially in the South and Midwest, the shorts continued to air, in part because some audiences saw the stereotypes not as offensive, but as affirmations of their prejudices. Screen Gems eventually pulled the property, but not for noble reasons. The studio was developing a live-action Western and didn't want the bad publicity spilling over. The Adventures of Pow Wow was quietly buried, but its legacy endures as one of the earliest examples of organized native protest against offensive media portrayals. What was supposed to be wholesome turned into a cultural flashpoint, marking the cartoon as one of the most notorious animated controversies of the 1960s. Number 6. Yellow Submarine, 1968. When Yellow Submarine premiered, it wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural shockwave. On the surface, it was a Beatles cartoon filled with whimsical songs and dazzling animation. But beneath that candy-colored exterior, parents, critics, and educators saw something very different, a psychedelic fantasy that seemed to embody the era's counterculture. For some, it was a masterpiece. For others, it was a dangerous influence on children. The story itself is a wild trip. The Beatles, animated in surreal form, travel in the Yellow Submarine to defeat the Blue Meanies, bizarre creatures who want to silence music and joy. On paper, it's just a quirky good versus evil tale, but visually, it was loaded with swirling patterns, kaleidoscopic transitions, and dreamlike imagery that echoed the psychedelic art of the 1960s. To a generation already worried about youth culture, the film felt less like entertainment and more like propaganda for mind expansion. Religious and parental groups immediately pounced. Letters poured in accusing the film of promoting drug use, even though no substances are mentioned outright. The psychedelic visuals, paired with the Beatles' reputation at the time, made the connection unavoidable in the public eye. Some schools banned field trips to see the film, while local theaters in conservative towns refused to screen it entirely. Even the satire rubbed people the wrong way. The Blue Meanies, with their rigid authoritarianism, were seen as veiled jabs at political and social institutions. Critics sympathetic to authority called it subversive. Supporters, however, saw it as bold social commentary wrapped in pop art brilliance. The controversy didn't stop the film from being a hit, but it changed the way animation was perceived. No longer could studios claim cartoons were just for kids. Yellow Submarine became a cultural dividing line. For some, a dazzling work of art. For others, a Trojan horse smuggling countercultural rebellion into the minds of children. Today, it's hailed as a classic, but in 1968, Yellow Submarine was considered one of the most controversial animated films America ever embraced. Number 5. Gay Purry, 1962. On paper, Gay Purry should have been a charming delight. Judy Garland lending her iconic voice to an animated feature about Parisian cats? Sounds like a safe bet, right? Wrong. Beneath the glittery animation and whimsical songs, this United Productions of America film stirred controversy that audiences in 1962 weren't ready for. The film follows Musette, a country cat who dreams of sophistication in Paris, only to fall into the clutches of a shady character who plots to sell her. The setting of Paris cafes and nightclubs was supposed to feel stylish, but parents and critics alike felt uneasy about what they saw as thinly veiled depictions of vice culture. Gambling dens, shady back alleys, and questionable characters felt far more adult than the studio intended. Critics accused the filmmakers of trying to smuggle grown-up themes into what was marketed as a family cartoon. Then came the blowback from industry drama. The film was produced by UPA, the studio behind Mr. Magoo. Judy Garland's involvement was a major draw, but behind the scenes, disputes erupted with Warner Bros. Over distribution. This legal fight only magnified attention, making audiences dig deeper into its content. Suddenly, what should have been harmless cat adventures in Paris became the subject of debate about whether animation should stick to safe children's stories. The real kicker? Parents wrote letters complaining about the film's tone, accusing it of planting ideas about nightlife and temptation in children's heads. Imagine sitting with your kids expecting a Lady and the Tramp-style story, and instead finding hints of betrayal, manipulation, and a heavy dash of despair. Even the upbeat numbers by Garland couldn't erase that darker undercurrent. Ironically, the controversy helped cement the film's cult status. While it never reached the commercial heights of Disney's hits, Gay Per became a case study in how animation could push into unexpected mature storytelling. Today, it's remembered less for its artistry and more for the raised eyebrows it generated. A sweet story, wrapped in Parisian glamour, turned into one of the decade's first animated scandals. Number 4. The Incredible Mr. Limpit, 1964. Now, let's talk about one of the strangest blends of animation and live action ever made. The Incredible Mr. Limpit starred Don Knotts as a meek man who magically transforms into a fish, yes, a fish, and ends up helping the U.S. Navy hunt German submarines during World War II. On paper, it sounds like harmless fantasy. In practice, it stirred debates about propaganda, military influence, and the role of animation in wartime storytelling. The live-action portions show Knotts as Henry Limpit, a timid bookkeeper who longs for adventure. When he becomes a fish, the movie transitions into colorful animation, following Limpit as he uses his new abilities to aid the military. The climax? Limpit single-handedly helping the Navy defeat enemy subs. While entertaining, this raised immediate red flags. Critics accused the film of disguising military recruitment as family entertainment. Parent groups complained that kids were being enlisted by cartoons. The U.S. Navy openly supported the film, even consulting on certain scenes, something that only fueled accusations. It was thinly veiled propaganda. The mix of comedy and war themes left audiences unsettled. Was this supposed to be a children's adventure or a pitch for military might? Religious groups piled on, criticizing the film's mocking tone towards serious global conflict. Meanwhile, educators debated whether children could handle seeing lighthearted cartoons tied so directly to war imagery. In some cities, theaters reported parents pulling their children out mid-show, upset at the violent undertones. Despite the backlash, the movie earned a strange cult following. Don Knotts' quirky performance as Limpit kept it memorable, while the controversy ensured it remained more than just a curiosity. For many, The Incredible Mr. Limpit blurred the line between fantasy fun and nationalistic messaging, and that blurry line made it one of the most debated animated films of the decade. Number 3. Alice of Wonderland in Paris, 1966. Most animated films of the 1960s aimed for spectacle, sweeping colors, catchy songs, and big adventures. But Alice of Wonderland in Paris took a very different path. Instead of dazzling audiences with originality, it cobbled together several unrelated animated shorts and slapped a new Alice storyline on top to sell it as a feature. What happened next? Outrage. The premise promised something whimsical. Alice of Wonderland fame travels to Paris for new adventures. Sounds magical, right? Instead, the film recycled earlier UPA shorts and tied them together with a thin narrative about Alice wandering around and watching these stories unfold. To parents and critics, it felt like a bait and switch. They thought they were buying a brand new animated feature for their children, but got a stitched-together anthology with little cohesion. The controversy wasn't just about false advertising. The tone of the shorts varied wildly, with some leaning into darker or more surreal storytelling. Critics claimed the film confused its audience, offering neither a consistent story nor a safe family outing. Letters poured in from angry parents who said their kids were bored, upset, or bewildered. One reviewer called it a cash grab disguised as fairy tale magic. Even the marketing came under fire. Posters and trailers leaned heavily on Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland legacy, tricking families into thinking it was a continuation of the classic. When viewers realized the deception, word spread fast. Some theaters dropped it within weeks. In the end, Alice of Wonderland in Paris became a case study in how not to package animation. What could have been a charming collection of shorts turned into a scandal about trust, creativity, and honesty in children's media. Audiences didn't just dislike the movie, they felt cheated by it. Number 2. The Phantom Tollbooth 1969, released 1970. When Chuck Jones, the legendary director behind Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, adapted Norton Jester's beloved book The Phantom Tollbooth, expectations were sky high. But when the film finally reached theaters, it landed with controversy instead of acclaim. The story follows a bored boy named Milo, who drives through a magical toll booth into the Kingdom of Wisdom, where he meets personified concepts like Talk the Watchdog and the Weatherman. Sounds like a fun allegory, but here's the catch. The film doesn't shy away from sharp satire. It pokes fun at rote education, blind obedience, and shallow authority figures, subjects that made school boards and educators nervous. Released at the dawn of the 1970s, but produced in the late 1960s, the film clashed with expectations for safe family content. Parents complained it was too intellectual, too strange, and too critical of traditional learning. Teachers worried kids would take its satire of schooling as encouragement to rebel. Some religious groups piled on too, accusing it of mocking order and discipline. The film's release was delayed for nearly a year due to studio hesitations, and when it finally appeared, the backlash overshadowed its artistry. While critics praised its wit and creativity, controversy swirled over whether children could handle such biting commentary in a cartoon. In hindsight, The Phantom Tollbooth was ahead of its time, tackling themes of conformity and imagination with bravery. But in 1970, that bravery looked to many like subversion. It quickly vanished from theaters, leaving behind a reputation as one of the boldest, most controversial animated experiments of the decade. Number 1. 1001 Nights, 1969, U.S. release. Finally, topping our list is a film that arrived from Japan but stirred its biggest storm right here in the United States. Osamu Tezuka's 1001 Nights. Released in America in 1969, this animated retelling of Middle Eastern folklore stunned U.S. audiences, and not in a good way. Tezuka, known as the god of manga, packed the film with wild visuals, exotic settings, and daring humor. The U.S. distributors marketed it as a colorful Arabian adventure. But once audiences sat down, they discovered something far more provocative: bold reinterpretations of legends, suggestive humor, and cultural caricatures that didn't sit well with American viewers. Parents were outraged that a film billed as a children's cartoon contained themes and imagery they felt belonged nowhere near kids. Religious groups condemned its reworking of sacred tales. Cultural organizations slammed its stereotyping of Middle Eastern traditions. Theater owners found themselves at the center of heated debates over what was appropriate to show to family audiences. The backlash grew so strong that in some regions the film was outright banned, while in others it was heavily edited. What remained was still bizarre enough to shock its audiences. Tezuka's visionary style was simply too unconventional for American sensibilities of the time. Ironically, the controversy gave the film a strange notoriety. Animation fans later praised it as groundbreaking, while mainstream audiences remembered it mostly as that cartoon parents warned us about. For the 1960s America, it was too much, too fast, and far too controversial to be embraced. And there you have it, 11 animated films from the 1960s that didn't just entertain. They shook audiences, sparked debates, and sometimes even got pulled from screens. From psychedelic dreamscapes to Cold War paranoia, these movies proved cartoons weren't always safe Saturday morning fun. Which of these surprises you the most? Did you grow up hearing whispers about any of them? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more deep dives into animation's wildest history.